Welcome back to The Small Nonprofit, the podcast where your passion meets action. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Small Nonprofit Podcast. I'm your host, Maria, and today I'm here with Sarah. Hi.
Hey, Maria. Thank you so much for having me. I watch your podcast and it's just so great, and I'm really excited to be here. My name is Sarah Ali. I am a digital first fundraiser. I have been in fundraising for about 12 years, digital for 10. I actually got my start as a law student. I wanted to fight for justice for Palestine, and then I read a bunch of case law and found out that justice is not necessarily found in the courtroom and that movements need a lot of money. So I ended up leaving law school and getting my first fundraising job. And since then, I have been a fundraiser. So today, I am the founder of SA Digital. We're a digital first integrated fundraising consultancy. And I also fraction at agencies. And I'm currently the executive director of the Muslim Philanthropy Network and am on the board of the Elham Fund, which is a charity working for folks, families who require direct cash transfers in Gaza in the midst of the genocide.
Okay, you're doing like 1,000 things, and they all sound very important, which is awesome. Where do you want to start first? There's digital first, there's like the pure community stuff. What is the thing that really sparks your fire?
Right now, I'm really jazzed on Muslim giving. I'm really jazzed because I think we're in this political moment where every time you open up social media and every time you open up the internet, we are flooded by images of war. And those images have largely been produced, created, and shared from Muslim audiences. And because Muslims are something like 1.7 billion people, those algorithms, organic algorithms on TikTok, on LinkedIn, as many of us have seen, and on Facebook, on Instagram, are being flooded by Muslim led and Muslim serving content that is generated for Muslim audiences by Muslim audiences to ensure that people take action in the midst of war. And what I've noticed is that as the algorithms and as the platforms have sought to remove this content, something like 80% of the pro Palestine content on TikTok has been removed, it doesn't matter. The algorithms are still flooded. And I have noticed, and a lot of folks have noticed and commented, that in the last year, the corporate sector has shifted very intentionally to serving Muslim audiences. And my suspicion is that these two things are not unrelated. That as we see the geopolitical face of this world change, as well as the digital landscape in response to war and genocide by and for Muslim audiences, we're also seeing capitalism and we're also seeing capital shift. So, for example, this year, every single bank, every single corporation had an Eid Mubarak message or had a Ramadan Kareem message. And that's, I believe, largely intentional because Islamic finance assets are set to triple globally over the next 3 years. While the rest of the global economy is in significant decline and has predicted global recession. So, from a charitable standpoint, and as folks who work in social impact, social good, mission driven work, I think it is important for us to take note that Muslim audiences are being spoken to and cultivated and solicited by corporate, and the nonprofit sector is unfortunately years behind. And so the way that this has informed my own work is that after the October 7th attacks, I meaningfully and intentionally shifted my consultancy into only really serving Muslim-led and Muslim-serving organizations, and have been really grateful to be part of a project called the Muslim Philanthropy Network that is bringing together Muslims who work in both the non-denominational and the Muslim-led sector to talk about how we steward this capital and how we work with organizations who want to engage these audiences and diversify their donor base or diversify their leadership. So that's where my head has been at these days. It's what I've been working on for, I don't know, 10 months of the genocide, 10 months of my life, whatever. But yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, so I love all of that. I love the community by community for community thing. I love the use of algorithms. I think that's so smart and so exciting to be able to see that come to life. One of the things that does worry me though is when you're talking about banks putting out messages like Eid Mubarak, anything like that, does the community feel tokenized? Are like people happy to see that? Because that's one of the things that I see nonprofits feel very hesitant to do. They feel like, oh, I'm tokenizing people if I wish them Ramadan Mubarak. And it's like, are you? So like in conversations with my own Muslim friends, they don't seem to feel the same way as some of the nonprofit leaders in the space. And by nonprofit leaders, I'm talking about usually white people who are not Muslim themselves. They don't know how to like position reaching out to a Muslim community. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I really appreciate you saying that. And I think it comes down to cultural competency. And I think that unfortunately, a lot of the leaders in our sector are not culturally competent. And so there's this like strange hesitancy about speaking to diverse audiences or with diverse audiences or acquiring diverse talent and leadership. And I think it's actually just like a personal barrier. I don't know if it's when, and unfortunately it's reflected systemically when you look at Muslim communities, and it's diverse, right? Islam is a religion, it's a faith, which means that there's a significant number of Black Muslims, there's some indigenous Muslims, there are queer Muslims, there are disabled Muslims. Islam really, this creed as a category, cuts across many of the other things that people face and barriers. People tend to feel good when they're spoken to in their own in words that they use, and that's what I see in the way that Muslim charities are able to talk to their donors who are largely Muslim themselves, is that they're using words and phrases that are culturally competent and very relevant, and as a result audiences don't feel tokenized. Whereas myself, there's a white-led organization that recently launched like a racialized fellowship, and they put a hijabi on their landing page, and I happen to know that this company has a history of racial harm. And I saw the hijabi on the landing page, and I felt disrespected. And I think if there was a hijabi in leadership, or if there's hijabi even on staff, it wouldn't feel that way because it's reflective of the work. But that's the difference. I think the difference between putting a picture of someone who's visibly Muslim versus saying Ramadan Kareem to people who are fasting and really do want to hear that it's a good time to celebrate. I think that's the competency question.
I think that's such a good point because if your friend says Merry Christmas to you or something and you're not celebrating, it's not automatically offensive, right? It's just about that cultural competency of understanding. But it's interesting because I see that this expands into so many different cultural aspects. With Jewish communities, there's also not that understanding of like how important giving is. And same thing with like Christian communities. There's so many different ways to target these faith-based groups that would be like very happy to give, that feel spiritually called to give, who are already part of your service user base for sure, for sure. So it's like reflective of your service users, but they just can't get past, I don't know how to talk. I don't know if it's okay because it's not my personal religion or something like that. And it's just frustrating to see because you don't have to be the exact same lived experience as someone else to talk to them about giving.
And what's interesting is that the shops who have gotten over that, so I think, for example, like Trillium Hospital, Trillium Health Partners, pardon me, I'm just they just recently received the largest community gift from the Muslim community ever, a $1 million contribution. And the only way they were able to cultivate and then later solicit that gift is through relationship building. And I think that is actually the cornerstone for a lot of leaders in terms of how they then build this cultural competency. I had the opportunity to support a US based charity in their kind of entry into Muslim giving. And they had already created community leadership councils for different affinity or identity categories. So they had an AAPI, so an Asian American Pacific Islander affinity group, API leadership council, pardon me, composed of leaders from that community who advised the board and advised the SLT. And so we essentially did the same thing for them for the Muslim community. We identified the leaders based on who's in the mosque and who's in the corporate sector and who does what. And then they approached them to join a leadership council. And it was incredibly successful because diverse professionals often require these kinds of volunteer titles even to validate our own experiences as people in our own sectors or in our own jobs, etc. So it's really a bi-directional. It helps in both ways because the Muslim community, the Muslim Leadership Council was able to help QA and edit some copywriting, was able to support with messaging, support with what's the right tone and feel to approach community members. And it was really a culturally competent giving experience once it hit the marketing and the collateral stage.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about your digital expertise. Because something that came to mind is I was working at the Canadian Civil Liberties Association when George Floyd was murdered, and every organization was like Black Lives Matter, blah blah blah, and they were like fundraising off the murder of George Floyd. So I wonder if you're seeing that right now with the genocide in Palestine. Like, are people kind of people, organizations, either in or outside the Muslim community, using social media to fundraise like off the back of the genocide, or are you seeing a different kind of discourse?
So I both in non-denominational and in the Muslim-led organizations, I'm seeing either fundraising or lead gen happening off of this, and I think it makes sense from a lead gen perspective because there's significant amount of advocacy that needs to happen. So the petitions and the emails to target or the text to your MPs that are all really quite significant in the ad market right now are not, it doesn't feel so extractive. It feels very values and objective and mission driven. That being said, political parties are doing lead gen off of it as well. So that to me, I see, okay, that could be of concern because, of course, lead gen leads to fundraising. That's what lead gen is for. And whether or not you do your lead gen because you have a strong GR strategy, it still ends up fundraising at the end of the day. So when I see, for example, Oxfam has a lead gen at a petition email to target, but you know what? Oxfam has done work in the region and continues to be there. So it's like this has value. But if a political party is doing it, it's a little uncomfortable. But one thing we're seeing in the Muslim sector is that I think organizations are feeling concerned about restricted funding because there have been so many Gaza related appeals by Muslim led charities. And unfortunately, Muslim led charities have not broken out of the trap of restricted funds because of the ways in which zakat and sadaqah are categorized. And I think there are ways to do donor transparency and programmatic education so core funding happens. But what Muslim led charities are grappling with right now is now how to return to core funding appeals when the Gaza fundraising has been so predominant for the last 10 or so months.
I wonder if there's opportunity to look at organizations that do disaster relief. Like they do a lot of work around like hurricanes or tornadoes or anything like that that like really decimates an area. And then what do you do for fundraising during the time between disasters, or if it's an ongoing disaster? Like how do you communicate that to your audience in a way that keeps them engaged and isn't, I don't know. I like what tone are you taking in communications right now? Is it's still hopeful we can do it? There's we all need to be in this together right now, or is it very hellfire, this is horrible? Like how do you balance that horrible crisis?
The campaigns that I have had a hand on since the genocide began, the lead gen has been very, like we have to take action. There's a real problem. We cannot be silent. But the fundraising has been more hopeful. And the reason has been because the statistics and the organic social are so deeply painful and dehumanizing that telling stories of hope and joy in the midst of a genocide has incredible value in helping us recognize each individual child or each individual mother or father, whoever, a grandparent who has been lost as an individual. And what I've found, or what we have found in the campaigns that I have had a hand in, is that it performs well. People, I think, feel better knowing that there are concrete things that can be done in the midst of an overwhelming global political situation that is helplessness and is, I think, collectively traumatized us. It's worked better to be positive and use the hope-based communication strategy, which we know works in the market for everything anyway.
Thanks for sharing that like trauma piece, because I feel like there's so many times where like things will impact our communities and we're just expected to go into work and not talk about it. I remember I was at work one day and they had a shooting of like probably 20 Mexican people at a Walmart in the States. And I was just so shaken for at least a week, but you just come into work because other people don't understand. So I wonder if there's like a lot of like peer support popping up outside of social media, like in-person interactions, also like community building, just to hold some space.
There's a really beautiful initiative of funders who have come together called the Palestine Impact Collective. So there are folks from big funders in Canada and in the GTA who have come together to essentially discuss how can funding be allocated to support this work. So I really do see in the philanthropy space, whether it's fundraisers or funders, people trying to cross pollinate and trying to figure out how do we make this happen in a way that affects some real change when the political situation just hasn't moved for so long. And I think that a lot of the community organizing that has happened, whether it's around people who have almost been fired for their positions on Palestine, whether it's around the right to wear keffiyeh in the school boards. In Oakville there was a question about that came up. I think people are organizing and communities are coming together over this in a way I haven't seen since before COVID. So to me, that's the silver lining, that I went to Palestine over a decade ago and I was arrested and deported for my activism. I spent time in the IDF jail and the deportation facility. And when I came back, nobody cared. Nobody cared about Palestine. But today, alhamdulillah, it's on everyone's mind. And there are things that our leaders can do and things that practitioners can do to take action and make impact in this moment.
You're also an expert in mobilizing, and I'd love to hear about how that has played into your fundraising strategies over the past year. Because I know that you were doing some really interesting stuff, I think, around WhatsApp a year ago. So I'm just curious to hear what you do, how you do that, and maybe explain to our audience a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I use a tool called the engagement pyramid, or the pyramid of engagement. So the engagement pyramid essentially allows us to see each stage of engagement or each portion of the pyramid as intersecting between volunteer giving, advocacy, organizing, etc. And so what I have found is that there are so many digital tools that can be used to mobilize people to act on and offline, both organic and paid, that WhatsApp communities especially have been really helpful. We saw the NCCM, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, use WhatsApp for their Impact Advocacy Hub, which was doing all of those kinds of emails to Target and petitions that I mentioned earlier in the discussion. And while I haven't seen it been integrated with their fundraising, in my own campaign work with clients that I serve, we have been using WhatsApp as a combination effort to organize communities and mobilize action, but also to have folks come together and give together. So they're almost like WhatsApp based giving circles where donors of high levels can chat back and forth with the community administrator in the chat about their giving and what's happening. And people are egging each other on to give more. And unfortunately, I can't tell you the name of the client because we haven't approved a case study or anything, but it's really cool. And I've never seen it done. So I'm really excited.
No, that's totally okay. How many people do you usually find in a WhatsApp group? Does it have a limit? What is the logistical aspect of it?
So it used to be 256 members of a WhatsApp group, which is not a lot. Now with communities, that has changed. So each community can have groups within it. And then that way you're able to scale out. And the other piece is the broadcast aspect. So you can have a general chat, which is just broadcast that can have as many people as you want. And so you're able to segment really well, especially as users opt in, or prospects or leads opt in. They can self select what portion of the work they want to join, as well as being invited.
And how do you get them into WhatsApp?
I'm really into QR codes at in person events. It's just such a clean intro. The other way is through organic social. We've been onboarding people, and then through email. So, really, just using all of our regular comms channels to put out the word that, like, we started a WhatsApp community. In here, you'll find activities to do with your kids, ways to make your donation go further, and actions you can take to, like, further to get closer to the work or whatever. I can't remember the wording. And it was great because people, each link went right into the same community with many groups, and then people would just join the community and then choose a group and be invited into it as well. And once they're in, that's an SMSable number. There's ways to integrate that with email in a really clean way, especially if you can cross reference between your CRM. So the sky's really the limit once people are onboarded.
It seems like such a brilliant way to build the deepest engagement possible with people because you only get texts from your friends, right? WhatsApp, you only have your family on it, right? To just like have such direct contact with people that is informal. I think that's always really important. The more informal, the better, because it deepens that relationship. That is quick and accessible to them. They're always on their phone. It just seems like a very interesting way to build community with the organization, but also like outside of your organization, which is like how you build a movement.
And to be honest, like I started doing WhatsApp work in when I was in Palestine. That's where I first learned to do WhatsApp work, because I was working with an organization called Youth Against Settlements, and essentially all volunteers and kids or youth had video cameras, and we were taking video footage and then we were centralizing it into a WhatsApp, and then it was broadcasted out to journalists around the world. And that was like, it was essentially a rapid response framework to the Israeli occupying forces. And so that's the work that got me into fundraising. And so now to see charities start to say, okay, we can use activist methodologies, or and especially those that have been grown at the community level from the global south, is really exciting, because it reminds us that innovation doesn't necessarily live in wealth. Innovation lives in diversity and in scarcity and in necessity.
It also gives you the option to move away from something like Twitter that might have been used like in activist circles before of here is the rapid fire news that you need right now. Here's how you can take action right now. Just moving away from Twitter as a platform, X as a platform.
Absolutely. The artist formerly known as X.
Yeah. Whatever it's going to be called by the time this podcast is released. Yeah. Do you find other kind of like digital engagement tools as helpful? Like something like Reddit, I've heard could be really interesting, but I don't know much about it.
Reddit is really good for content creation, because Reddit, doing an AMA or doing having a leader interact on Reddit, the comments end up generating so many content ideas. And it's really useful for researching what people online really think about your organization or your leader. So, from an organic perspective, I've seen organizations take content inspired by Reddit, like you take ideas from Reddit and turn it into TikTok content and use that, because TikTok is such a rapid channel that requires so much content. Reddit becomes this content generation mill, which is really lovely. From an advertising perspective, I haven't tested it myself, but I do keep getting ads from the Reddit platform promising me a $5 return on ad spend. I will, in fact, be reporting back on that not too long after this call, when I start exploring it.
I follow some SEO experts on Instagram because how nerdy can you get? But anyways, they're talking about how the new AIs that are out there and also Google's new algorithm are scraping social media platforms for understanding what brands are important and like what to direct people to on the first page of Google's. For example, if your nonprofit is mentioned in different subreddits by different people with different IP addresses, then you're like more likely to rank higher on Google, which I thought was super, super interesting.
And all of search is now AI powered. And the crawler, both, yeah, so the Google crawler and AI are scraping from social. So it's even more important than ever to have a really well defined narrative strategy and a content strategy with pillars and topic clusters, like going back to communications 101 to get your nonprofits or your charity story out there. And especially as we see different things play out in the news cycle and different things play out on Google Trends, if you just go on there and see, oh, what are people searching for, this is a great tool, then you're able to build that into your organic strategy in order to increase your domain authority, but also to increase your findability overall. Whether or not someone is searching and you're ranking high on Google, if your posts are even coming up on the feed, the algorithm is determining based on whether or not you're keywording with what the internet is looking for. And so I love using Reddit as like a backlink outreach, like a backlink strategy. And it's smart, and it's, I think we're really in a new world of digital. I think we're in a new geopolitical context, and I think we're in a new world of diversity and inclusion. And I'm personally really excited to see how we can innovate to meet the needs of these moments.
Let's touch on the diversity part because I myself love a good Ramadan campaign. I love it and I recommend it to my clients frequently. They don't always take me up on it, But let's say you're at an organization that currently doesn't have much Muslim representation in it, right? Like maybe the service users are Muslim, but maybe not so much the senior leadership team. Would you advise them to start trying to do a Ramadan campaign or like doing some messaging around that? Or what would be the first step?
The first step would be to do a listening survey through the list to see if people are interested in zakat, in giving their zakat. And the reason that's important is because that lets you know if you have donors who are Muslim and are interested in giving their charity to your organ. And when we talk about zakat, zakat is closer to what we might see like Christians do, like tithing. It's a 2.5% wealth tax on everything you own. So every year, every Muslim who does their zakat, and it's one of the 5 pillars of the faith, so it gives you a sense that's like pretty important. There are people who don't do most things, but they'll still give this zakat because it's so important. They are essentially looking at Ramadan typically to calculate how much of their assets they're meant to give and then make decisions about who to make donations to. If you have talked to them 3 months before Ramadan and said, hey, we would like to start a zakat fund, would you be interested in giving your zakat or your sadaqah, which is the gift above that tax? And most people do give above that zakat amount. Then you have that list available, and you can either meaningfully engage. You may have larger donors that you can call up and be like, oh, what do you think about this? How would you like to see it happen? And take a really listening first approach. And then once you have a survey, and you can send out an email that says, hey folks, we've established a zakat fund and we're excited to be fundraising for it for Ramadan. And then it's all very clean. It doesn't feel like it's, guess what, guys, we care about Ramadan too. It's, we want to give you guys an opportunity to give in a way that's meaningful to you, using your words and your language. And if you don't know how to do these things, and you're not familiar with zakat or sadaqah or Muslim giving, you should absolutely get in touch with me or with anyone who's involved with the Muslim Philanthropy Network, because we're creating and codifying these tools for the sector right now.
Something that I've done that has been successful is also doing like a tribute card model. So it's like maybe you're not Muslim, but you definitely know someone who's Muslim who's, fasting right now. Just send them a card saying like thanks, sorry, not send them a card saying happy Ramadan. Like it's just simple, it's easy, and the person loves it because they're not expecting it from like their friends that are not Muslim, which is so lovely. And it also helps build your list too, because now you have that person's email.
100%. And you feel like when I get a Ramadan or an Eid message from someone who's not Muslim, it feels special to me, because to me it feels like they took the time to care about my Christmas and the things that what my family and people who look like me do during this time. And especially given that we're just such a significant global population, I think at this stage it should be expected that these types of greetings and stewardship pieces and cultivation solicitation meets that need.
This other piece, so one of my best friends is Muslim, and she's always trying to give me like a quarter of an animal, so like a goat or a cow or something like that. She's like, a quarter has to go to a friend. I'm like, a quarter, that's a big amount, right? A quarter has to go to your family, a quarter you keep for yourself, and a quarter goes to charity. And I was like, if food banks could tap into the strategy, like if only you knew that there was this whole community dedicated to giving you a quarter of a full animal every year, like how much further could you take this, right?
There's actually been this really cool, I think it's either called Give 30 or Hunger 30, right? And so that is like Mississauga Food Bank, and a bunch of food banks with a significant Muslim population have come together for this campaign. And it's something that, like, I think it's such an easy move for an organization that has food service, and it's such an easy move because it's like the messaging is all there for you.
And that's what Ramadan's about.
It's all about hunger. It's all about food. It's all about joy and community and connecting. And that's the basis of fundraising too: joy, community, and connecting.
I love it. Ah, okay. Is there anything else that you want to leave our audience with today?
No, I'm really grateful for the chance to chat about these things. I'm really passionate about Muslim giving and about diversification of both revenue, leadership, and audiences, and most certainly on the work that is being done in Gaza. So if I can leave you folks with one request, which would be connect with me on LinkedIn and take a look at the organizations that I've had the opportunity to be a part of.
Nice. Okay, so they can find you on LinkedIn. Anywhere else that they can find you that you like them?
LinkedIn is my home, so please feel free, to add me on LinkedIn. And if you'd like to send me an email as well, I check my email as much as possible. So it's sarah@sarahalidigital.com.
Nice. Thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your knowledge, and just your expertise has been so lovely to hear about. And I know that everyone's taking something away from this conversation, which is great.
Thank you so much, Maria, for having me, and thank you for the amazing work you do with this podcast and in the sector.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into another episode of the Small Nonprofit Podcast. If you want to see our lovely faces, as always, we have this uploaded on YouTube so you can see us just being ourselves and having this conversation. But until next time, bye for now. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Small Nonprofit. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to connect with our guests directly or find me on LinkedIn. Let's keep moving money to mission and prioritizing our well-being. Bye for now.